Welcome to the next session. We now have a session on web scraping, and I'm looking forward to the talk. And just turn on your mic.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. Today I want to talk a bit about web scraping and browsing with Python. I want to have part of this talk focus on web scraping on the most simple concepts possible, because I really see scraping as a concept that it can really push people from different kinds of backgrounds to have interest in software programming, and I had some experiences with that in the past. And then I will move to my experience with scraping and crawling on the tech market. First of all, I want to introduce myself. I am Lidiane. Feel free to call me Lidi. I have the link for my social networks. I will share these slides at the end of the presentation. So if anyone wants to get in touch, please. I am a Brazilian immigrant. I live in London since 2023. And when I was in Brazil, I used it to be quite active in the Python community. I feel like it's a really inclusive and a really warm community. Since I left Brazil, I have been trying to adapt myself to my new life. And this is the first time that I'm doing a talk outside of Brazil, and by consequence, it's also the first time that I'm doing a talk in my second language, so please bear with me. And I am a software engineer at RTC today. Starting with web scraping from the basics. What is web scraping? It's the most used technique to scrape data from the web when there are no easier ways to get it, because ideally we would have APIs for everything. There is data, we need the data, we hit the API and we get properly structured data already. That's not always the case. Sometimes we don't have an API, sometimes the costs for the API are very high. Sometimes the API doesn't provide exactly the data that we need. In that condition, we often go to web scraping, because that's an easy way to get data. If you can get it via browser, with some exceptions, you can get it via scraping. Exceptions because some sites don't want to be scraped. You might find some challenges, some obstacles. You might have some forbidden errors when trying to scrape a website, and kind of also very related to what we were talking about ethics in technology. If you know that a website do not want to be scraped, of course you would have techniques. You can always bypass, but ideally, if the site do not want to be scraped, don't scrape it, unless you have a way to reach out to the owners, to the organization, to whoever maintains that site, and then you can build some kind of partnership and get authorization to do it properly. First, talking about the most popular and the most simple library, which is Beautiful Soup. Beautiful Soup is a very popular Python library used to parse elements into Python objects. And I really like, because I think it's really cute, because the name of the library comes of the idea that just like Alice in Wonderland's poem with the same name, it tries to bring meaning to things that at the beginning it might kind of seem meaningless, because when you are scraping data from the web, you will send an HTTP request, get a response. Out of that response, you will have a huge string containing all of the HTML of that web page, and it's very hard to manipulate those. So with Beautiful Soup, you can get that huge string, you can turn it into easier to manipulate objects and work with them without having to go through much hassle. So for us to have an example here, let's scrape PyCon Austria blog. In this example, I'm accessing the blog and there are several posts, and I would like to scrape just the title to start. Let's scrape just the title for each one of the posts contained in this web page. can compare like. Actually, let me show first on this slide because it will be easier to see. Here, it's the most simple example that I could think of to illustrate, where we are just using two libraries, requests, most common library used to make HTTP requests within our code, and BS4 from Beautiful Soup. Beautiful Soup from Beautiful. Here we are like making a request to the URL to the blog. Then we create our soup object by passing to Beautiful Soup the response that I get from the request, and I tell them like I want like this is supposed to be parsed as HTML. Based on that, because I already checked it, I have the website, and then I used the DevTools. And then I know already that all of my titles are contained as H2 elements. So because I already identified that pattern, that can be very easy now. I want to use the method provided to me by Beautiful Soup. By using like soup.find all H2, then I can get out of like that huge soup of elements, I can get all of the H2 elements in an array, and then I can iterate on them, and then I can just call element.text. I could do this for any HTML element. I'm doing this for the H2. So here, I think I am not connected to the internet because I need to make a request. Oh, I am. So here I am running the script, the same script that I just showed on the slides. And then here I have I am just calling my script, and I can see that I can get each one of the titles from the blog. Here I just kept the same example on the slides because whenever I'm talking to web scraping, about the web scraping, I like to have also some offline examples because I could have issues because yes, like live demos of web scraping might be challenging with the internet connection. And here is what I was talking about before. In Brazil, we use it a lot of, like me and my group, use it a lot of like this concept to bring programming knowledge to folks from different backgrounds. This is FATEC Jundiaí. It's the institution where I studied and where I came back several times after graduating on workshops, on technology weeks, things like that. And this one I like it a lot because most folks that we see there on the peak on the right, they are not from any computer science background. We would do like 4 hours long workshop talking about like very basic concepts like algorithms, if-elses, for loops. But then we would introduce Beautiful Soup and let them try to manipulate those. And in our experience, we could see much more interest from them than when we were trying to just like talk about algorithms because it felt so abstract for most of them. The previous experiences weren't that fun, but when we gave them the opportunity to interact with the websites that, depending on their background, their interest could be like very diversified, then they were interested in learning more about programming because they could manipulate the data that was already relevant for them. They already had the problems. They already had their own demand. They just like the technique. And this was like, it ended up becoming like interesting collaboration. And here, talking a bit about web crawling, this is already starting more like on what's interesting for us, more on the engineering aspect of it. Like if you are building, like if you want to scrape very simple things, you want to fulfill one need, and it's possible to get it with Beautiful Soup, then yes, go for it. But when you are working like on a complex project where you need several kinds of pages to be like often scraped, you want some kind of automation there. if we went back to our previous example, let's go to say that I wanted more data from the PyCon Austria blog. If I wanted more data, like that maybe it's not already available in the first URL, but that I needed to access each one of the posts there to get the rest of the data. We don't want to maintain one script for the list, one script for each one of the posts. We want to build our own bot that can crawl, that can start at one point of origin, in the blog, and then they are able to crawl across different posts, jump to one or the other, and that we can automate those, that we can deploy, rely on constant automation for those, and like often we are working with those, also pulling that data to our own databases. So we want to ensure that you have the entire life cycle working consistently. Here another example of a problem, more related to the crawling part of it. Let's going to say that I want to collect the data about all of the movies that are considered popular right now. I can use for that the list of most popular movies provided by Rotten Tomatoes. And then I want to know the title, the director name, and the synopsis for each one of the movies in that list. This is already a problem that it's a bit more interesting, because now I have data spread across different pages. In my starting point, I have one page containing all of the movies. Like, I need to go to this page to know which movies I'm interested about. But I need to go to the movie details page to get things like synopsis and director, because the initial page won't provide me with those. I can actually show the actual page here, because then it's easier to see. And also one interesting fact here, like for example, I use it to like for demonstration purposes to use IMDb, because it's often the first website that we think about when we think about popular movies. IMDb recently asked like for people to stop scraping their website. If you try to scrape their website today, you will have like a 403. And this is related to what we were talking before. If they don't want to be scraped, we shouldn't be forcing it, especially for like purposes like this. Rotten Tomatoes, like they have like no kind of explicit requests in place, and you have no errors when you were scraping. So that's why I went with this one. So here we have a list of the most popular movies, and each one of these movies has a link for the movie page. So here, I'm still here because it's also a Brazilian movie, and as a Brazilian, I am very proud of the first time that Brazilian cinema got an Oscars this year. If we come a bit like down here, then we can see that we have here the synopsis and the director name. So these are the three data that I want then. Movie title coming from the list, synopsis and director for each one of them. That's where scraping comes in place. We want already some kind of automation that requires more structure from us. So we have already a very, very mature and good framework that's focused on scraping and crawling. It's open source, and it's like open source on a very collaborative and warm level. Like the community, like the company actually, because Scrape is maintained by Zyte. But the maintainers of Scrapey, they are like very welcoming. If you're looking for interesting open source projects to contribute, in my experience, all the interactions that I had with them on GitHub, on Stack Overflow, it's always like very, very nice. And it's a cool framework, and because like it has this specific nature that I think like it's very often very different from our usual needs on a day-to-day job, it comes with its own kind of like technical challenges. So it's also like something very interesting, like for learning purposes. And it's built on top of Twisted, a popular like event-driven network engine. And because of that, it benefits from the same characteristics as Twisted. It's efficient and asynchronous, which you can imagine are both very interesting when we are trying to like scrape data in constant way, in periodic way. Those are very desirable. How do we scrape things? By building spiders. Spiders are the classes defined on Scrapy when you're using Scrape framework that allows us to define what's the structure, what are the point of start, where do we want to start our scraping, what are the rules to be followed. All of this we call like part of our spider. So here we will like show a spider that can access our pages, our movies list page, that can collect the movie title at that point, can access the linked page for each one of the movies in that list, and collect the data from the movie details page. I will also have here the example on GitHub. If anyone wants to poke around the example later, feel free. This part, I think it's easier to go to the code directly because it will make more sense. Here, sorry. Here I have the example of a spider, where I am there defining like my class that it's like my most popular movies spider. And there are some things here that are very specific and make the magic happen with your own Scrapy framework. The first part is where I define the name. Because I said like, right after I define the class that the name of my spider is most popular movies, that is the name that we will use every time we want to run the spider, which I will show in a couple of minutes. Start URLs. When I define anything like name it as start URLs, Scrapy framework will already know that's the start point. So here I am defining that I want to start from that same list on Rotten Tomatoes that we just saw. And the parse method. The parse method, it's our hint to Scrapy. Like, this is what we want you to do at the beginning of the flow. This is like where I will define the instructions so you will know exactly how to start. And then within the parse method, I can use like CSS selectors, XPath selectors. I can get and clean up the data in a very similar way that we were doing within Beautiful Soup. So if you look here, like I am getting like the list, the links that I'm getting from the response because I already came here. And I knew like I won't go much into like the dev tools because I don't think it would be like much work during the presentation to go like to the HTML and CSS confusion here. But I already checked each one of these like on the dev tools and identified this was the common pattern. Like all of the links contained this CSS class associated with it. And then, because I'm interested in where the link points to, then I will get the A tag for each one of them. Once I already like discarded all of the part that I don't want and I can focus on the links, that's the precious information for me, then I can iterate through them. I know that the link already contains the title, which is like one of my prerequisites, and I want the link itself, so my spider will know how to crawl. So I am getting here like the URL contained on each one of the links. This is totally not needed. It was just like for debugging purpose, the sprint over there. And then I tell my spider, I want you to follow those. You started on the list, on the original list, but I'm giving you the link that I want you to follow on each one of the cycle. As a callback, I am calling this other method here that I'm calling parse movie. This could be called anything. This is not specific to Scrapy. But when I am defining another method here, then I can tell exactly what I want to happen on each one of the movie details page. So if I look to parse, it's looking to like the movies list. But if I look to parse movie, all of the elementals all of the elements that's trying to get here are actually the ones contained on this page. And because I also already inspected the HTML here, then I know how to get like summary, director name, and then I just have this movie item there that I am calling. I have my movie item that I am calling here, which is defined on that other file. Feel free to ignore the nominee item because this is from a different scrapie on the same repo, a different spider on the same repo, but movie item is where I am defining everything that each one of the items for the spider should have, which is title, summary, that's the way that I'm calling the synopsis here, and director. And then, once I load all of those items, once I load all of these values to my item, that's all that I need to define, because now the spider knows how to operate. If I come here, now I can call my spider doing this. Like, now I have tons of stuff. If I come here, I can see that it's crawling each one of the movies that I asked in a not super friendly way. I have everything in my logs, but it's already working. Like, for me to scrape something locally, this is enough. I have like also some information that the framework provides to me for free, like which item is being scraped, and in the end some cool stats, including how many requests were performed, how many items, where we can think here that item is each one of the movies, how many items were collected, any kind of stats that are often desirable when it comes to a project responsible for scraping and crawling. Running the spider, which is like what we just did now. And yes, as I said, to run it locally, that is enough. And in theory, you could even like do your own, build your own service and build your own logic to handle that data, because now you already have the data. However, Zeit, the company that owns Scrapie, they also provide data management in the cloud, which can come in quite handy. Yes, like as I said, they are the creator and maintainers of Scrapie. Their former name was Scraping Hub. They provide two kinds of services. Zeit Managed Data, which is like they offer the service. You say, I need recurring scraping for the website X. And they sell you the output in that case. Like, if this is something that you're not very interested in putting too much effort, or if it's like a website that it's way too complex because different websites have different levels of complexity, they might even have a ready solution for it, and then you can buy the data directly from there. Or the other one, which is the one that I want to show here, is Scrapie Cloud. When you're using Scrapie Cloud, then they define themselves as like Heroku of scraping. You can scrape data, and then you can host and monitor all of these spiders in their cloud. And there is like a high availability database, because this is something that you could also understand that it's very desirable. You will be hitting like websites over and over. You want a database that is resistant, that can handle failures, that it will succeed in continuing even in case of problems with like network problems, in case of like interruptions on the workflow, in case of any kind of errors. You want like everything to still be up and running. Here, it's the dashboard for Scrapie Cloud. And then on the dashboard, I can see here, like I have 3 spiders here. The one that I'm using for this example is my most popular movies spider. If I come here, I can see like I have 28 items, where here I have all of the data that I scraped via the spider that we just showed here, with all of the fields according to the definition from my movie item. And here, like, a team can also interact. We can also, like, often when you are scraping things, sometimes things will go unexpected. Sometimes their data there is not valuable. Sometimes there is something that you're like, this data could be cleaner. Maybe my spider could be doing something to handle these edge cases. Maybe sometimes idea comes up by the time you are inspecting the output. And then you can even comment, like talk to other people in your team, very similar to how we would like review PRs in GitHub. We can also like review our scraped data on site. The dashboard is very powerful and very friendly, meaning that like you can even like interact with other folks from the organization. Maybe there are people that are interested on that data that are not even like for an engineering background either. And there is like a lot of valuable data that you can get here about like what were the requirements from those for that project. You can also have the log, so if there are any kind of exceptions happening on your spider or anything that you're just interested in investigating, it will be here on the logs. Stats, similar to the statistics that we just saw on the console now, the same stats will also be available on the cloud. So like, if there were like 40 items that should be scraped and then you found out that you only had 28, something might be wrong and you want to investigate it. From the scraping cloud, you have different ways to use the data. Here are the three most common, which is just basically downloading the data. You can download the CSV, JSON lines, XAML. You can actually publish the data set and share it on site. Let's say that like are different organizations benefiting from the same data, and in the case like you can just share it through the cloud. And the one that I also think it's more interesting for us, like on the engineering perspective, to query the data via the Scrapy Cloud API that's provided by Zite. The Scrapy Cloud API, it enables like interactions both with the spiders, with the data that you collected, and also to manage your jobs in the cloud. You have like two different endpoints, where the first endpoint is mostly to manage your spider. So you can even like trigger a deploy, you can cancel something, you can retry, you can do the entire management via the API. And the second one, which is storage, it allows you to actually interact with the data itself, with the content collected during the script. And if your client-side project, the project that you're using to consume these spiders, is also in Python, then you already have like the Python Scraping Hub client, which makes everything easier. If you're using on any other kind of app, of course, you can like just hit the HTTP API anyway. But if you're using in Python, it's way more fun, and you already have that way easier. Here, I have a link like for the official API and one example of a very small app that I built in Flask just for the purposes of this presentation. Here, this is a Flask app, as I just said, that's running exactly that data that we just saw on the cloud. So here I have at once like all of the title, director names, and synopsis for each one of the movies listed on Rotten Tomatoes. If I come here, for example, I could even like, sometimes it takes a while, so I'm not sure if it will like. But if I come here, for example, I can see like that I will have another job running now, And once that job like finishes, then I should be able to like see the outdated data on my Flask app. And this is like, I think like this illustrates already like how can you combine things, for example, because here, to keep like the scope of the demo limited, I'm only scraping Rotten Tomatoes. But let's say that I wanted like my website to provide more insights, like out of the directors, for example, considering like all of the most popular movies, like are there like gender differences? Are there like nationality differences? What kind of insights? And then I could also be scraping data from other websites, pulling everything to my own site, and getting to like the conclusions or the analysis that I intend to. Once in like around 10 years ago, one thing that I was doing to like practice scraping that I thought it was quite fun, I use it to fetch news from like newspapers, like and trying to get to the same conclusions that the reporters did. So one thing that I thought it was pretty cool is like once I saw news on a very big portal in Brazil that was telling me that the inflation was the highest ever seen on that year than in the last, I don't remember, 14 years. And I was like, okay, that sounds reasonable, but I want to get to the same conclusion that the reporter did. And because the reporter always shared like the source that they use it for that, for getting to that conclusion, I bought my own spider and I asked it to get the data for the last 15 years because I wanted those to match. And once I got there, I didn't have the same answer as the reporter. And I was like, I am probably doing something wrong here. And then I reached out to the reporter on social networks and I asked, hey, can you just clarify to me because I'm getting to the different answer than you. And I would like to know, like, I'm doing this for learning purposes, and I would like to know where am I getting things wrong. And the reporter got back to me and said, actually, thank you, because your conclusion is actually corrected. And then he updated the article because he agreed with it. He said, yeah, this data was not calculated properly. And this was me as a student, like when I was still on the same institution that we saw there with very limited knowledge. But that's how powerful this web scraping is. Here now, if I update this page, I can already see very different kind of data because I just ran my job on Scraping Cloud now. This job, of course, because it's for demo purposes, it only runs when I go to the button and click on run. But if this was a professional project, an actual project, then we would be just scheduling it and ensuring that it would run once a day, once a week. The frequency that we think it makes sense. And here, I can also share how I got into all of this and a real life application. Love Mondays was a Brazilian startup that used it to operate in exactly the same way as Glassdoor does, but in Latin America. And then, because of that, it ended up being acquired by Glassdoor at some point. Today, Love Mondays doesn't exist anymore because it was replaced by Glassdoor Brazil. But this page that we are seeing here was built exactly that way. We would build using Scrapy framework, Scrapy Cloud. We would scrape job positions from different sources because there are so many sources where job positions are available. And then when someone would get to Love Mondays and look for example, Python programming jobs, we would centralize all of them. However, I can't show the site anymore because it's not live anymore. But then when someone would click on each one of these job positions, there was a CTA there telling apply for the job. And if you click it on the CTA, then you would be directed to the original source. This is one of the kind of things where scraping is actually benefit for both parts. many of the companies listed here actually had a policy against scraping. So when that kind of thing happened, this is what I'm saying. Like I was saying, if the site doesn't want to be scraped, and maybe they just don't want to be scraped by anyone, but they would be willing to make exceptions. So often we would get in touch with many of the companies responsible and say, hey, we are Love Mondays. If you allow us to scrape your website, we will have the position here, and the users will be, in the end, users who want to apply, they will end up having to go to the traffic on your website anyway. And most often, we would get a yes from them. They would be willing to allow us to scrape because they wanted the traffic. And for the users on the other side, for our users, it was also a benefit because then they didn't have to go through 5, 6, 7 different platforms to find the jobs they wanted. Glassdoor also does the same nowadays. Glassdoor also does web scraping. I just thought it would be cooler to use Love Mondays example because Love Mondays was based on Scrapy and Python.
Question. Any guidance on how we as scrapers, if we want to scrape a website that doesn't make their data easy, what advice can you give us in terms of tricking out their hidden APIs? Because they're feeding their data from an API. So that data is somewhere in the network feed, it's hidden. So any advice to us on how to trick out where is that hidden API in the data stream?
Can you summarize the question for the recording?
Sorry. Yes. There was just a question about how could we, as developers, as engineers, could work on that, on the data that's very often hidden, that's especially when it comes to platforms that do not want to provide that data available to everyone, but they are willing to provide to some, and what is our way to work around those? And that's a very good question because often the companies owned the other websites, they weren't also heavily on tech. They just had one website available to provide the data, and not often they had the solution. So often when they didn't have something out of the box for us, once they said they were willing to work on it, we would be the ones making the suggestions to them on how to make the data available to us. Often what we asked, we were just asking for them to provide a XAML that would be filtered by IPs. So they would allow list our IPs on a XAML that was accessible just for us. So we would scrape the XAML data and not their actual websites. In the meanwhile, everyone who tried to access the website was to block it. Does that answer the question?
No.
No, sorry.
So maybe let's see further into the discussion. So, and you just continue and
yes, this was actually the last slide. And the references here with the links for Scrapy website, Scrapy GitHub for the company, Zeit website and Zeit GitHub, and the link where the slides are available if anyone is interested. But yeah, we can ask for questions.
So then I give you the mic so that you can pose your own question.
A repetition of what I just asked in terms of how would you advise a developer when they're looking at the network stream, how to trick out which of those streams is the API and the API data, and then how to go about parsing it, whether or not it's been converted to hexadecimal, whether or not it's just basically been zipped, or it's a 64-bit, isn't that it? Bit 64? Help me out with the, UTF-8, etc. So there's lots of websites, as you pointed out, that are now blocking this information, and who wants to deal with XPath? No one wants to deal with XPath. That's a mess, that's ugly, and it often doesn't work. So again, how do I figure out which is the hidden API data stream in the network flow? Thank you.
Yeah, to be honest, when there were if they were fine with it, it's always also there is like a human factor there that is very present. In some cases of websites, like if you inspect, you can see like the network request and you can get to the API. But if that's not like visible, if this is not something like, if it's a hidden and we don't have access and talking to them, we also don't have that kind of information, our approach would usually be like, let's not do this, because then it's an indicator that like we shouldn't.
Or talk to them.
Yes, or talk to them, unless they are like willing to provide that to us.
Any more questions?
How have large language models impacted web scraping in recent years? Because I know for parsing data, there is a lot of complicated transformations that you need to do. So I know some of that can be solved with large language models, but maybe for scraping at scale, it isn't always feasible.
I'm sorry, can you just repeat it?
Oh, sure. So when it comes to web scraping and large language models for processing the data that is scraped, or just giving instructions to scrape the website directly, how has that impacted the web scraping industry or practices in recent years? That would be my question.
Yeah, I wouldn't know how to answer that. I never actually faced that.
Okay, I was just curious if you tried that out.
Any more questions? Then, thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.